Thank you for listening to this PodcastOne production. Now available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, PodcastOne.com, and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
The Steve Austin Show is brought to you free today by our friends at BetOnline. Get in the mix at betonline.ag and use the promo code PodcastOne for your 50% welcome bonus. BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts and exclusive partner of PodcastOne Sportsnet.
PodcastOne presents the Steve Austin Show Classics.
Jerry the King Lawler's on the line. Jerry, what's happening, man?
Steve, thanks for having me back again, man. Everything's cool. How about you?
Oh, dude, just when we left off on the last episode, we were talking about promos and everything else, and I've got 5, 6, 7 pages of notes sitting here in front of me, and I hadn't even used them one single time because, man, just in sitting there talking to you, one thing turns into another, and I'm not a classic interviewer by any stretch. It's just two cats from the world of pro wrestling talking.
Yeah, and you know, Steve, guys like you and I wrote a book. I wrote my autobiography back in 2000, and I remember somewhere in the last chapter, or in the early part of the book, I think, I put, when I first started in the business, I would come into the locker rooms and I would hear some of the older wrestlers sitting around telling these old war stories, and then I wrote in there, if I ever get like that, somebody take a gun and shoot me. And then at the end of the book, I think I wrote, somewhere out there somebody's loading the gun right now. But you know what? That's just what happens. I mean, you know, those are your memories, and those are fond memories, and fortunately for you and I, sometimes people want to hear about our experiences that we had during our careers, you know. Every
time I get somebody on the show, there's so much of my crowd comes from the world of pro wrestling, as I do. And, you know, I obviously want to keep growing that audience, but they love talking about the old days. One thing I forgot to ask you last time we talked, and I don't know if this was specific to the car I was in. I believe it's the way the territory was run. I was in USWA. It was 1990, and I was traveling with Chris Champion and Dutch Mantell, and every now and then I'd jump in with a couple of other guys. But for some reason, back in that Tennessee territory, all the boys rode down the road at night after the shows with their dome light on. Why was that? Did y'all do that too?
I don't know. Somehow I started that.
You did?
I did start that, and I think I originally I did it to keep myself from falling asleep. I think at first I you know, the first few trips I made, man, when we would get dark in there, and I always, if you remember, I almost always rode by myself.
Yeah.
And just listening to the radio in the darkness or whatever, I'd get sleepy, and so I just remember one night I said, man, I'm gonna turn this dome light on and light up my car and make it feel like it's daytime, and it just became a habit, and somehow, I don't know, somehow it caught on. Everybody around the territory, in the Tennessee territory, started riding with their dome lights on at night. It was crazy.
I couldn't understand it. I got there and we'd ride down the road at dark, and of course I was driving. I was the wheel man. They were putting gas in the car. I said, turn your light on. I said, what are you talking about? We got to turn your dome light on. That's what we do here. And then later on, you know, back in the day, you know, we were drinking, you know, driving down the road. This is back when you could actually do it and not, you know, have any crashes or whatever.
Right.
It's turned absolutely crazy these days. That's 25 years ago, however many years ago it was. But nonetheless, you know, I'm thinking, man, here we are drinking beer with our dome lights going on. This isn't the smartest idea in the world. These guys would make real bad criminals.
That's exactly right. If you remember, we used to play. You know, it was so boring on the road. I mean, because you know, our trips were the same every week.
Every week.
You know, if you're staying in Memphis or Nashville, you know, on Mondays you drive down to Memphis, 200 miles each way. You know, to and from. Tuesday you drive up to Louisville, which was like 170 miles one way, and then Evansville was 150 miles, and Thursday may have been Lexington or, you know, whatever. But we had a lot of long road trips, and so we were always looking for anything to do to entertain each other. I don't know if you remember, I was notorious for having a little portable, like a blue light, that I would put up on my dashboard, and I would if ever I would see some, you know, one of the other wrestlers that were past me or whatever, I would pass them. I would pull off at like the next exit, and then, you know, watch as they went by, and then speed up behind them and turn this blue light on, and then, you know, and at night keep my brights on and the blue light on the dashboard, and they'd tell them, I'd lean out and, you know, shout, okay, get out of here, put your hands on your head and face the front of your car. I can't tell you how many times I've walked up and frisked the guys and everything, and goose them or something like that. One night, Kamala was the funniest story ever. He was, he was kind of new in the business, and I just wrestled against him up in Nashville, and I pulled him over about halfway down to Memphis and pulled him off on the side of the interstate, and he's standing there on the interstate, big old Kamala with his hands on top of his head. And so I'm up behind him. I said, "Okay, raise your right foot up in the air." So he's standing there on one leg with his hands on top of his head. I said, "Okay, now jump up and down." And finally he turns around and looks and he goes, "Oh, Jerry."
Hey, you know what? I was down. I was just fixing to get into business. I was playing football at North Texas State University outside of Dallas. I'd go up, watch a Friday night show at the Sportatorium. I'd go to the Saturday morning television taping. And, all of a sudden, here comes Kamala, the Ugandan giant. And y'all did these videos right. Of him. And these were shot in Hendersonville, right there on Jerry Jarrett's property, right?
Yeah, it looked like it was Africa, didn't it?
It did, but break down how Kamala was created, because that was a great gimmick, and people bought into Kamala, man, because, man, when he come down with that hand strike, that was the real deal.
Yeah, it was. Well, I'll tell you what, it was one Monday night. We were having wrestling at the Mid-South Coliseum, and I remember, we'd stand in the back. The guys could stand in the back and watch from around the corner, watch the matches that were going on out there in the arena. And all the wrestlers would come in this one back entrance. And I'm standing there watching the matches, and all of a sudden I got a tap on my shoulder, and I turn around, and there's this big black guy, big tall guy, and he said, "Mr. Lawler, my name's Sugar Bear Harris." And he said, "I live down here in Senatobia, Mississippi." And he said, "I wanted to come up here and wrestle for you guys some if I could." And I don't know what happened. I just looked at him, and I said, "Has anybody seen you yet here tonight? Have you been walking around?" "No, sir, just come in the back door." I said, "Would you go right around there and just sit down in my dressing room? Don't let anybody see you." So he goes back there. I went and got Jerry Jarrett. He and I went back there and looked at him. And I swear, there was this artist named Frank Frazetta who did these great fantasy paintings, and it was, as soon as I saw this guy, this painting came to my mind. There's this famous painting where this beautiful girl is tied to a stake, and a bunch of these cannibals are and they're about to burn her at the stake, and a bunch of these cannibals were all doing this like crazy war dance around this girl. That's this painting, right? And that just came to my mind, and so I told Jerry, I said, "Man, I could paint this guy up. He could look terrific." So we told him to be in Hendersonville, Tennessee. Jerry had a 100-acre farm up there in Hendersonville. We took him up there the next day. I pulled out a National Geographic, and if you remember, the reason it was hot was at the time, the president of Uganda was Idi Amin, and he was a cannibal. He was a confessed cannibal.
Wow.
And this guy was the president of Uganda, and that was in the news all over the place. And so that's why it made it topical. And I looked at some pictures. I brought that picture of that painting that Frank Frazetta had done, and I painted Kamala's face. I painted James Harris's face up just like one of those cannibals in that picture. And we looked into the map of Uganda in National Geographic, and Kamala was actually a name of a city in the country of Uganda. And so that's where we came up with the name, literally honed a spear out of a stick and put a wooden point on the end of it, and put this old loincloth on him, took him out in Jerry's back on some acreage back there, and got a couple of pieces of dry ice and threw him out in this kind of little swampy lake that Jerry had. And we put James out there and turned the cameras on and had him come walking through the smoke, and it looked like, it literally looked like he was an African giant that was walking towards the screen. And it was just one of those things that it just clicked, man. We called up and had J.J. Dillon, who was had not ever been in our territory, because we wanted to make him so totally different. So we had J.J. Dillon cut a promo. We explained it to him, and he cut a promo saying that he had found this savage beast while touring the world, and he was going to bring him to the United States, and his first stop was going to be Memphis, Tennessee. And like you said, at the time, man, if you did things right, people bought into it, and they believed that this guy was a giant African cannibal that was being released every time he set foot in the ring, and he couldn't have worked more perfectly. I mean, we had to keep it simple, so that's where the chops came in, all the chops and the slapping himself on the stomach, and he didn't do much more than that. And it bite you, you bite you, and suddenly next thing you know, you're bleeding. And I watched some of the tapes of he and I having that first match, and it was like magic. I mean, he started biting my head, I started bleeding. He would touch my head with his fingers, and started licking the blood off his fingers, and it was just, it really looked exactly like what we told the people he was,
I remember that first, when y'all did that first video, I mean, there was like a 20 or 30 second clip y'all sent out, and it was like, showed him walking just like you said, and whoever did the voiceover is basically like, Kamala, the Ugandan giant.
Right.
Kamala. That was it.
Yep.
I was like, I got to see this son of a bitch. This son of a bitch is crazy looking. Whose idea was it? Was the moon and the stars on him?
That all came from the painting.
It was great.
That Frank Frazetta. I'll show you sometime. This Frank Frazetta. I later on became friends with him. He was one of the greatest artists of all time. But anyway, that was just the way that the guy body was decorated in that painting. And it was a funny story. For months, every night I would paint Kamala. I would do his face and all the paint on him down in the locker room beforehand, and I would paint those stars and the crescent moon on his stomach in yellow, and the stars on his pecs were white. And the funny story, one night after about 3 or 4 months of painting James, and you'd have to know him. He was just a big old teddy bear. Actually, that's what he used to wrestle as before Kamala. He wrestled as Sugar Bear Harris. But anyway, he just kept sitting there, and I'd paint him up, and he'd be patient. And then one day, finally, after about 3 months, he looked down and he said, Jerry, I want to ask you a question. I said, what's that, James? He said, why did you paint the big banana on my stomach every night? I said, James, it's not a banana. It's a crescent moon. He went, oh, okay.
All that time he thought it was a banana and it was a rib?
He thought I was making some kind of joke on him or something like that.
Oh, Jesus, that's great.
He thought I was painting a big banana on his stomach.
You're listening to another classic episode of The Steve Austin Show, only on PodcastOne.
Hey, man, do you own or rent your home? Sure you do, and I bet it can be hard work. You know what's easy? Bundling policies with Geico. Geico makes it easy to bundle your homeowners or renters insurance along with your auto policy. It's a good thing, too, because you already have so much to do around your home. Go to geico.com, get a quote, and see how much you could save. It's Geico easy. Visit geico.com today. That's geico.com.
You've had some, your classic feuds with a ton of people, with, from Terry Funk. Oh, we got to talk for a second about that Terry Funk empty arena match. We talked about that a little bit earlier. What was the deal with the empty arena match?
If you remember, Stephen, I mean, in the territory days, you worked the same towns every week, and usually once a week. I mean, those days are certainly gone with the wind now. I mean, the WWE will hit a city, if you're lucky, twice a year. But back in the day, it's just like, for instance, our major city was Memphis, and we did Memphis every single Monday night. We had live wrestling every Saturday morning for 90 minutes on Saturday morning TV in Memphis, and then that was like basically a 90-minute long commercial to come to the show at the Mid-South Coliseum on Monday night.
Yep.
It was week in and week out. So, man, you were under the gun to, like you said the last time I was on your show when we talked about Jerry Jarrett promoting, he and I were under the gun every week to try to draw a crowd. I mean, that building had 12,000 seats in it, and you were just looking to put as many people in there every Monday night as you could. And so when we would get somebody like a Terry Funk, a big name like Terry Funk that could come in on a weekly basis for us, that was a big deal, because it was hard to get somebody to come back week in and week out, week in and week out. So what happened with Terry? We got going, and we were just doing such a good run. We probably worked 5 or 6 straight weeks there. I swear, if I'm not mistaken, it may have been Terry's idea in the way he cut a promo one week. He just said, it's hard to get a fair shake in this Memphis, this Lawler's hometown. He said, it starts from the minute I land in an airplane coming in from Texas. As soon as I get off, I get picked up by the cab driver. he starts talking about how bad Lawler's going to beat me, and then he drives me 10 miles out of the way, so he charges me extra in the cab. Everybody, they delay my baggage because they know I'm coming in to fight their hometown hero. He said the fans are on Lawler's side, the cops are on Lawler's side, you announcers are on Lawler's side, everybody. Let me just tell you, if I could ever meet Lawler on a common ground where he had no advantage, where he didn't have anybody to help him, no referee on his side or anything like that. So that was the premise of this thing. He had a piece of paper in his hand. He told Lance Russell, he said, here's a paper with a place and a date. And if Lawler will meet me there, nobody but him and me, no referee, no fans, no nothing, I will beat him within an inch of his life, and I'll prove to everybody in Memphis what a phony he is, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So that's how that came about. And then, of course, we did it. We did it on a Monday afternoon before the matches were that night.
Oh.
He flew into town. And so we had the arena already set up for the matches that were going to be that Monday afternoon. So he and I just went over to the Coliseum early. Of course, nobody but Lance Russell and the cameraman was there, and that's where we had the match.
But how was it working with just all that silence? Because you listened to a crowd as good as anybody in the history of the business. And it certainly had to take the adrenaline out of it.
It was really unusual. I mean, it was the first time I'd done anything like that either, and so it was strange. It was different. But Terry, if you ever go back and watch the footage, Terry was never quiet for 1 second during that match. He was always shouting or yelling or something, so it wasn't exactly like it was completely quiet, But I just wish we'd have done more outside the ring and thrown into the chairs and different things like that. But it all led up to the big finish of when Terry had busted the ring steps and had this big jagged piece of wood, and he got me in the ring, and he was just about to stab me with that piece of wood when I kicked it back, and he gouged himself in the eye. And, of course, the blood started flowing out of his eye, and then the classic, unforgettable thing, my eye, my eye. And it was just so great, and just what made it so different was, Terry made it look like it was real in the fact that, hey, nobody was there, and this wasn't really going to be on TV or anything, so he was cussing. It was like a Stone Cold promo, He says, where is that son of a bitch? I told you that yellow bastard wouldn't show up, and this was unheard of at the time, so you knew he was going to bleep it out, but it made it seem so real.
Hey, let's talk a little bit about Andy Kaufman. You guys had a damn feud, and I watched that thing. Of course, I remember back in the day. Whose idea was it to bring Andy Kaufman in?
It was Andy's idea.
So what did he do? Did he reach out to you and call you?
He reached out. The first thing Andy did, and let me just give you a real quick background on Andy Kaufman. Andy Kaufman was from Long Island, New York. He grew up as a kid being a huge wrestling fan. He told me he used to watch Nature Boy Buddy Rogers, and the funny thing about the wrestling had a major influence on Andy's entire career. He used to tell me, he said, I was amazed at watching this Nature Boy Buddy Rogers, that somebody could go on TV and intentionally, he said, I could tell he was trying to make the people hate him. And he said, but yet he was still popular. And he said that just like struck a chord with me. And as Andy grew up in his performances, he always had that in the back of his mind. Andy would tell you, and he told me many times, he said, I'm not a comedian. I never told a joke in my life. He said, I'm just a performance artist. And he said, I just like to do things to elicit a response from my audience. And he said, I enjoy getting a negative response. I enjoy when people don't like me. And so he would do a lot of that sort of thing and throughout his career. But then when he became the Lotka character on Taxi, and Taxi was the number one show in America at the time, the highest rated show on TV, and Andy just wanted to use that celebrity status that he had to sort of live out a fantasy of his, and that was to be a bad guy wrestler. And so he started doing that in some of the nightclub comedy acts that he did and comedy clubs and things. He would invite women up on the stage to wrestle with him, and he'd have some mats down, and he'd have his friend Bob Zamuda dressed in a referee shirt and come out, and he just played the role of bad guy wrestler. He'd insult the women and do all of this sort of degrading comments to him, and then he'd wrestle him and actually beat him in a wrestling match. And he did that for a while. He did it on Saturday Night Live and on the Merv Griffin show and different places. But he wanted to wrestle in front of an actual wrestling audience. So one night in New York, I think the show was at Long Island, and he went to the show and he approached Vince McMahon Sr. at the time, and he introduced himself and said, and told him what he had been doing, and he said, I just want to wrestle in front of actual wrestling fans, in front of people that came to see wrestling and see the response that I'll get doing it there. Fortunately for me, Vince McMahon Sr. said, well, Andy, he said, I'll be honest with you, he said, our fans are kind of skeptical anyway, and he said, I'm just hesitant to involve a Hollywood actor in our shows. He said, I'm just afraid that the people might think, that we're all actors and that we're all acting. He said, so I appreciate it, but I'm going to pass at this point.
He was 30 years too soon.
30 years too soon, exactly. But my friend Bill Apter, Bill Apter,
yeah.
He was the editor of Pro Wrestling Illustrated or a photographer and writer for them. He overheard the conversation, and he knew Andy. He grew up in the same town as Andy. And he told Andy, he said, hey, you know what? And, of course, Andy, all he knew was New York wrestling. So Bill said, hey, I got a friend, Jerry Lawler, has a territory down in Memphis, Tennessee. He said, I'll bet he'd be interested in this. Let me give him your number. And so out of the blue, I get a call from Andy Kaufman, and he's talking about coming down, and he just told me the same thing that he told Vince McMahon Sr., and I thought, God, this guy's one of the biggest stars on television.
Right.
Of course we'll have you come down to Memphis. That's how it all started. He came down literally just wanting to wrestle women out of the audience, and he did that. We sold out immediately. The people hated him. He cut some promos talking about the women, talking about the South and all of this sort of stuff.
Did you help him with his promos, or was that just all him doing his thing?
Well, the first one he did, he sent one in that he just did on his own. And the next ones, he actually came over to my house, and we sat down and we cut promos with Andy, and he and I just came up with them for about an hour. And because, he wasn't going to be able to come back every single week, so we wanted to have plenty of promos in the can. And I swear, after the first 3 weeks of showing his promos, the TV station manager called up and said, Jerry, you guys, we can't show these Kaufman promos anymore. And I said, why? He said, oh, my God, the people with their phone calls, they're threatening to burn the station down. If we continue to show, he said, these people, the fans hate Andy. They don't, and of course, what we had done, I gave him a bar of soap, and he cut the promo saying, let me introduce you to people here in the South to something. This is soap. Say it after me. Soap. He said, not soap, it's soap. And he said, what you do is you put it under the faucet, run some water on it, and rub it around your hands. It'll make lather. Put it under your arms and wash under your arms. And it's like, just insinuating that people in the South would never bathe. Then we'd cut a promo the next week of a roll of toilet paper. And he's telling a story like the people in the South had never even seen toilet paper. And so the people literally hated this guy. And we went for several weeks of him wrestling the women, and then I'm thinking, I got to get a way to get a rub off of this big Hollywood guy. So I went to Andy, and I said, and literally he was not thinking of doing anything but wrestling women. And I said,
really?
Absolutely. He never once thought of having a match with a man.
Right.
And that's what I told him. I said, Andy, this is going to only go so far. We need to keep this going. I said, you need to have a wrestle match with a man. And he said, oh, no. I'm the intergender wrestler. I don't want to do that. And he said, I'll get hurt. And I said, look, you and I can have a match, and I promise you won't get hurt. It'll be simple, but then most of it will be the build-up, the lead-up to the match.
Yes.
It'll be tremendous, And I said, we can just do anything to get out of it. And that's how the match came about. And then, of course, we really didn't, if you remember, we didn't do anything in the match other than drop him on his head with a suplex one time, which he told me later knocked him out. And
yeah, but that was great.
I gave him a couple of pile drivers. And as the match was over, they disqualified me, and as the match was over, he's just laying there. And so our referee, Jerry Calhoun, and then we had to turn away crowd, 12,000 people there, and they were all up around the ring, and they were so happy that Andy had finally got what he deserved, and they're screaming and hollering, and Andy just laid there motionless like he was dead,
Yeah.
So I'm walking around, holding my hands up, and finally the crowd's kind of, yeah, and I'm thinking, well, okay, it's time to get him up and get him back to the dressing room. So I told Calhoun, the referee, I said, all right, go over and lean over and tell Andy, to help him up and get him back to his feet and get him back to the dressing room. So Calhoun walks over and he kneels down, and I'm just still walking around looking at the crowd and waving. And so Calhoun, I see him talking to him. So then Calhoun comes back to me and he says, Andy says he wants an ambulance. And I said, an ambulance? He's not hurt. I said, no. I said, just go over and help him up and just tell him, you get some guys to help him back. And I said, just act like he's hurt on the way back to the dressing room. And so Calhoun goes back over again and says, tells him, and then a minute later he comes back to me and says, really, he really says he wants an ambulance. And I said, go tell Andy that an ambulance costs about $300 to come out here. And I said, plus, where are they going to take him? They can't take him to the hospital. And I said, tell him it's too expensive. We're not going to get an ambulance, right? So Calhoun goes over and kneels down beside Andy again, and Andy's still not moving, just his mouth. He's saying a few words. And the referee comes back over to me and says, he says he'll pay for it.
Oh, God, that's great.
I said, well, okay, if he'll pay for it, tell him to call an ambulance. So next thing you know, they call the ambulance. We wait there another 15, 20 minutes. He's still there. The crowd wouldn't leave. They're all there, and he's laying there like he's dead. And his manager, George Shapiro from California, was there, and his writer, Bob Zamuda, were there by his side, and his girlfriend. And so finally in comes the ambulance. They put him on the stretcher, and they put the neck brace on him, take him to the hospital. He goes through all the tests, and he stays in the Memphis hospital for 3 days with his neck in traction.
Are you kidding me?
3 days he stayed in the hospital with his neck in traction.
But he's okay. He's just working the gimmick.
Yeah, he's okay. He's working the gimmick.
But go ahead and book that out. This was him on the fly thinking this is what I'm going to do.
Absolutely him on the fly thinking this is what I want to do. That's just the way he was. He was a genius. I mean, and even the bit on Letterman was him on the fly. I mean, it was...
Well, let's talk about the Letterman thing. A little pause for the cause, but we're going to. I'm talking to Jerry the King Lawler. We're talking about his famous feud with Andy Kaufman. Going to take a little break. Thanks to my sponsors keeping this show on the air for free, laying down serious audio whoop-ass.
Hey, look at you. Untangling that bunch of wires like Clark Griswold. Come on, man. It's a wireless world, and everyone needs a great pair of wireless earbuds. But before you go spending hundreds of dollars on a pair, you need to check out the wireless earbuds from Raycon. Raycon earbuds start at about half the price of any other premium wireless earbuds on the market, and they sound just as amazing as other top audio brands you know. And Raycon's latest model, E25, is their best one yet, with 6 hours of playtime, seamless Bluetooth pairing, more bass, and a more compact design that gives you a nice noise-isolating fit. Raycon's wireless earbuds have gel tips for comfortable, perfectly formed fit, great for on-the-go listening and for taking phone calls. Don't stop the podcast just because you're getting out of the car. Let Raycon help take the show with you. Unlike some of your other wireless options, Raycon earbuds are both stylish and discreet with no dangling wires or stems. I've checked out the Raycon earbuds and I dig them. Pick up a pair and see what all the hype is about. Now's the time to get the latest and greatest from Raycon. Get 15% off your order at buyraycon.com/Austin. That's buyraycon.com/Austin for 50% off Raycon wireless earbuds. buyraycon.com/Austin. Andy Kaufman selling the pile driver in the hospital for 3 days. I'm talking to Jerry the King Lawler, the man who delivered this pile driver. So before we left to a little break, Jerry, the pile driver heard around the world. Andy Kaufman shells out $300 to bring your ambulance out. You tightwads, looking at the bottom line, don't want to spend 300 bones on an ambulance. So he's in the hospital for 3 days. And so then you go to visit him, obviously, or call him. So what do you guys do to book the next part of this?
Oh, no, I did not go to visit him at all. No, I didn't do that or call him or anything. It was just like he was there for 3 days, and then he went back to Hollywood. And the next call I get from Andy was just one day out of the blue, and he said, hey, do you want to be on the David Letterman show? And I said, Let me think about it, Andy. Yeah, I want to be on the team.
Dude, straight up, that's a shoot. He was in the hospital 3 days. He was in the hospital for 3 days. He goes back to L.A., and then down the road, you get a call, and he says, you want to be on Letterman.
Exactly.
Y'all hadn't talked.
Had not talked.
Okay,
no.
go ahead. So what happens?
Well, I said, well, what do they want us to do on Letterman? And he said, I don't know yet, but he said, it's this. He said it's a big network TV show, and I just thought it'd be cool. It'd be a way to keep our feud going. And I said, yeah, of course. And so, then they got back with me with the day. He said the Letterman people would be calling me, so they got back with me with all the travel arrangements.
Now hold it. When you say yeah, of course, you're thinking yeah, of course, because you want to be on TV, or yeah, of course, we can keep this feud going.
Well, both.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, I'm with you.
Probably most of all, I want to be on TV, on network TV.
Okay.
That's the most. But then I'm thinking, we had done nothing but draw sellouts with Andy, fighting the women, and then the sellout with me down in Memphis.
So he had heat, and he was selling tickets.
Oh, my God, huge.
Gotcha.
Absolutely huge. And he just got it as far as being a bad guy, as being a heel. I mean, he just had that natural instinct in him, and he knew how to play it off. And he knew, once again, we talked a long time ago about personal issues. He made it personal by attacking the women and attacking the people from Memphis.
Right.
And that just made everybody there. It was a personal issue with him. And here's this, I'm the big star. I'm from Hollywood, and you people are just a bunch of hillbillies, a bunch of hicks. So they contacted us to be at the Letterman on a certain date, and I flew up there and got to the Rockefeller Center there, and they had us meet early in the day. They filmed Letterman at 5:30 in the afternoon, so they met with us about 10 o'clock in the morning. They met with only me. When I got there, they said, "Well, Andy didn't want to be around you, so I'm going to have you meet with." I met with this Bob Morton, who was the big producer of the show at the time. He said, well, here's what we want to do. We've got the footage of you pile driving Andy. We're going to show that, and we're going to show Andy making some remarks about the women and about the South and that sort of stuff. And he said, that'll be in the first segment. And he said, then we want you and Andy to talk a little bit, and maybe in the first segment be a little bit antagonistic towards each other, not too much. And he said, then Dave will take a break. And he said, then we'll come back in the second segment, and during that segment, Andy will apologize to you for making fun of wrestling, and you apologize to Andy for dropping him on his head with a pile driver, and then Andy will get up and sing what the world needs now is love, sweet love. That's the way they had it laid out. That's what they told me, and then I left and went in the cab back to my hotel near Rockefeller Center, waiting to come back at 5:30. When I was back in my hotel, Andy called me and said, well, what do you think? And I said, well, what do you think about what? He said, well, what they want us to do. And I said, well, it sounds like it'll be funny. I said, but it'll probably pretty much be the end of our years of my feud with you and I apologizing to each other and everything being smoothed over. And he said, yeah, I know, that's what I was thinking too. But then he said, then just out of the blue, he hesitated a little bit, and he said, wonder what would happen if you just hauled off and slugged me. And it was so funny because usually you say, well, if you just hauled off and punched me or something, but he used that term. He said, if you just hauled off and slugged me. And I said, well, Andy, I said, first of all, probably I'll get arrested. And I said, I don't want that. And I said, second of all, they won't show that. They just probably won't even show it. I said, we may have made this trip for nothing, And he said, yeah, you're probably right. But wouldn't that be great? I said, so that right there is just the way. That's the last time I spoke to Andy.
Straight up.
Before we went on the air. And it didn't seem at the taping before we walked out to be on there with Letterman. There was no other talking or planning about what was going to happen. It was all from that point on, it was just all flying by the seat of our pants. It was just all improv or winging it, if you want to say. I just knew that we went through the first segment and we were sort of antagonistic a little bit. And I realized why at that point, because when it was time to go to a break, they had a wrestling ring bell under Dave's desk,
right,
and he could ring it with his foot, right? And so it was like he made it look like things were kind of getting out of hand, and he started ringing that bell, and he said, "Okay, all right, we need to settle things down here, and let's take a break, and we'll come back and see if we can get the hoses out and see if we can calm things down a little bit, right?" So we took the break. And during the break, Andy got up and walked away. They turned the lights down because it gets so hot in the studio. They turned all the lights down. There was a studio audience, I think, about 650 people in this studio, right? So anyway, just the 2 minutes go by for the break, and they say, "Okay, we're coming back on in 3, 2, 1." They turn the lights back up. Boom, we're back on. Andy sits back down, and so Dave starts talking again. He says, "Well, Jerry, do you think you owe Andy an apology?" And I said, And I don't know why. I said, no, not really. So it went from there. It just kind of escalated. And
Right.
he didn't apologize to me, and I didn't apologize to him. And I think in watching it back, when I look at Dave's face, I think that's the first time he realized, something's not going right.
Right.
It's not the way we planned this, right? So then suddenly Dave just, I guess he thought, well, we're out of time for this segment, so it didn't go like we wanted it to. So he said, well, you know what, we're gonna take a break here, and we're gonna see if we can get things sorted out. So I knew that was our second segment, and we were done after that.
Right.
So when Paul Schaefer started playing the music, and I swear, Steve, when I watch it back, it's like an out-of-body experience. It's like I'm watching somebody else do something. I don't even recall doing it. I just suddenly stood up, looked down at Andy, made eye contact with him, and I think at that moment he realized what I was about to do, and man, I just slapped the taste out of his mouth. Knocked him right out. I hit him as hard as I could. Knocked him right out of the chair over onto the floor, and the music stopped playing, and everybody was just like just like this hushed silence. And I watch it back, and Dave is just like, he wouldn't even look at us. He's just like staring straight ahead, like, oh my God, what just happened, And so anyway, the security guard comes over and grabs me and takes me back to the green room. And then I can hear this commotion going on out there. Like, Andy gets up and starts just ranting and raving and screaming and all of this sort of stuff. And so usually they just take a break for 2 minutes, and literally about 15 minutes went by while all this commotion was going on, and then finally it sort of quieted down, and I'm just sitting by myself in the green room, and suddenly the door kind of opens up a little bit, and this intern sticks his head in, and he said, Mr. Lawler, I think he was thinking, I'm going to stick my head in here with a killer.
Yeah.
I was the first person to ever strike another guest on a talk show ever in history, right? And so he says, Mr. Lawler, Dave was wondering if you'd like to come back out and sort of wrap things up. And I said, sure, I'll do whatever. So I go back out into the studio, and Andy's way over by the door. And I sit down by Dave again. And the crowd had turned into sort of like a wrestling crowd. All of a sudden, these 650 people start booing me as I come out, right? And so then I sit down, and they're going like 10, 9, and Dave looks over and said, Andy, are you going to come back in here or not? And he says, no. If I do, I'll say words you can't say on television. And he says, okay. And it was 3, 2, 1, and we're on. And Dave says, well, I'm here, and Jerry Lawler's here, and Andy Kaufman's here, and some nights I wish Tom Snyder were still here, which is, he had just taken over for Tom Snyder on the show. So anyway, he said, well, Jerry, I'd like to thank you for being here. And right about that time, Andy comes in off set, standing behind Dave, and he starts pounding on Dave's desk and screaming every kind of obscenity you can think of.
Absolutely.
I mean, he's just cussing, F you, F this, mother this, and one thing you had to know about Andy, and I think this is what really sold Dave on the deal, was Andy didn't ever curse or swear or get upset or anything like that. And for him to be doing this was just so out of character. But I'm thinking, oh my gosh, Andy, what's wrong with you? They're obviously going to show the slap, or they wouldn't have us back out here. And now here you are, you're totally ruining it now. I was just thinking, this is never going to get aired. So with my body language, I try to sit back in the chair and just like cross my leg, like show my disgust with Andy. You're killing it, right?
Yeah.
And so he grabs Dave's coffee, makes eye contact with me to let me know what he's about to do, and he throws the coffee so that I can get out of the way of it. And I jump up again, and then he runs off the set again. The security guy comes back again, and Dave was just so frazzled. It was just unbelievable. So the security guy takes me off the set again and takes me straight to the elevator. And he and I get on the elevator, and I'm thinking, oh, what's he going to do, take me down and lock me up or whatever? And as soon as the door closes on the elevator, the security guard says, man, I just want to get you out of the building. He said, because that Kaufman is an idiot. He said, his elevator don't go all the way to the top floor, and he's probably going to try to have you arrested. So let me get you out of here.
God.
So he takes me downstairs. I get in the cab, and I go back to my hotel. I didn't hear from anything from anybody. And this was like at about maybe 7 o'clock or something. And the show, of course, came on at 11:30. And I didn't hear a word from anybody, and I'm thinking, what are they going to do? Are they going to show this or what? So anyway, I turned on the TV at 11:30, and there it was, the whole thing. They showed it all, except, of course, when Andy started cursing and swearing, they bleeped it out, but they didn't put in beeps. What made it even funnier, they put in these little cuckoo, cuckoo. Every time he said a cuss word, he said cuckoo.
There was a lot of them.
It made it, yeah, there were a lot of them, but it made it hilarious, And then as soon as that show went off the air, as soon as that segment went off the air, man, my phone blew up. It was like the New York Times, it was like the New York Post, the Daily News, the Inquirer magazine. Everybody you can think of started calling about that. And then the next day, it was on the front page. Pictures of me slapping Andy was on the front page of every New York newspaper. You know what? Just last week, Steve, the TV Guide had on the front cover and a big story about the top 60 most riveting moments in television history. And it says in there, wrestler Jerry Lawler fights with Andy Kaufman on the David Letterman show was one of the top 60 still to this day.
Yeah.
I mean, the number one is like the Beatles making their first appearance on the Ed Sullivan Show, Elvis Presley appearing on the Ed Sullivan Show in 1956, and it goes all the way back to television history, and that is included in the top 60 most riveting moments of pop culture.
Well, when you guys are doing this angle, and it was tremendous, what do the other boys think about Andy?
Man, well, you know what? We kept him away from everybody else, and Andy was different in the fact that he would do meditation before a match. So he had his own dressing room. Nobody was allowed to bother him because he would literally meditate for like an hour and a half before it was time for him to go out and do anything. So
Straight
we
up
kept him away from everybody. He was sort of a strange duck in the sense that he had these little he was different from what the guys, from
right.
what we were used to being around. But by the same token, he was the nicest guy ever, most respected, loved the wrestling business. I mean, Andy and I were the same age, and he never referred to me once as Jerry. He always called me Mr. Lawler, and I would always say, come on, Andy. But he just, he was so respectful of the business and wrestling. And he told me before, he said, I'd give up everything I'm doing in Hollywood. I'd give up the taxi, all the TV shows, everything, if I could just stay involved with wrestling. That's how much he loved it.
You're listening to another classic episode of The Steve Austin Show, only on PodcastOne.
Here's a message from our sponsor, ZipRecruiter. Right now, we cannot be overwhelmed. We have to work to keep our loved ones safe and protect our communities. We have to work to stay strong, to stay connected, to stay focused. We have to work to inspire, to innovate, to build new solutions. But for all of this to work, we have to work together. As ZipRecruiter, we connect employers and people every day, but today is different. We are partnering with first responders, government officials, the medical community, the innovators, and the manufacturing, transportation, and food distribution industries to make sure we are finding the right people for the right jobs right now. Let's work together. ZipRecruiter.com/work together. Well, you guys are feuding 82. Did that carry into 83? Because he died in 84.
Absolutely. I mean, carried right up until Andy passed away.
Yeah. So was he feeling the effects of the cancer? So how was he to deal with? Was he feeling?
No, you know what? None of that ever showed. That hit Andy so fast. But Andy and I had, after that he came back and we had match after match. We had it down to where he was doing boxing matches, saying that he'd been trained by Muhammad Ali and showed all of this kind of stuff. And then he started bringing in people like Ken Patera, Jesse the Body Ventura, and all of these guys with a bounty on my head that he was going to pay anybody $5,000 that could hospitalize me with a pile driver. And we just kept it going week in and week out, and Andy just kept coming back. And then one week, if you remember, I had a thing on Sunday morning called the Jerry Lawler Show that was on Sunday mornings. It was just a 30-minute talk show with wrestling as a centerpiece, and I had Andy on as one of my guests on there one morning, and he was in another studio, and it made it look like he was out in Hollywood talking, and it was around Thanksgiving, and we were doing this little segment where we was calling the biggest turkey of the year, and we were going to superimpose Andy's head on this turkey's body. And I'll never forget, they had the camera on Andy, and he was sitting over there, and he said, let me tell you something, Lawler. If you put my face on that turkey, I'm going to sue you, I promise you. And he was coughing throughout this.
I remember that.
Yeah, and then after that interview was over, he walked over in the studio and he said, Jerry, I didn't say Jerry. I said, Mr. Lawler, he said, I apologize for coughing during that. He said, but I just this past week got diagnosed with cancer. And at the time, he thought lung cancer. And so anyway, that was the first. And I just like in the movie, I said, "Oh, Andy, that's not funny." And he said, "No, I'm serious." And so then right after that, he started going and getting treatment, and then he immediately started losing his hair, and then that once he lost the hair, he didn't come back anymore. And then the cancer was so fast acting, he only lasted about 3 months after that.
Oh man, that was rough.
Yeah.
How was your experience making Man on the Moon? The story of Andy Kaufman.
Well, I mean, certainly I had a great time. I enjoyed it. The only exception was the fact that it was tough working with Jim Carrey, because for some reason, one reason or other, Jim Carrey was so, I don't know if it's method acting or whatever, but he was so wanted to be so in character. He would show up every day on the set, already dressed, already in makeup as Andy. Nobody, even the director, and the director was Milos Forman, who directed Amadeus and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Yeah.
He was one of the most famous directors ever. Even he was not allowed to refer to him as Jim Carrey. Everybody had to refer to him as Andy.
Right.
I mean, and so that's how in character he was. And so apparently, one day I asked Milos Forman, I said, has he even read the script? Does he not know that Andy and I were really friends? Because he treated me throughout the movie like Andy and I acted always on television,
right.
Like we were bitter enemies,
Right.
I mean, he threw eggs at me at one time. He threw a bottle of juice that busted at my feet at me one time, and then actually one time during the filming of the fight scene, he was so into wanting to do and experience everything that Andy experienced. We were getting ready to, we were doing the pile driver scene, so he had actually called the week before we flew out to Hollywood to do the thing. He called. I got a call in like 2:30 in the morning, and I wake up and it's Jim Carrey and Danny DeVito and somebody from the studio and an insurance guy. 4 people on a conference call with me at 2:30 in the morning, and I'm like, what the hell? Anyway, and Jim Carrey and them are asking me, do you think it would be possible for me to actually give Jim a pile driver without him getting hurt? And because Jim was adamant on the fact that he didn't want to use a stunt double. He wanted me to actually give him a pile driver so that it would be so realistic. And it would be just like what happened to Andy. But the movie, the people that were doing the movie, the insurance people and all this, they were against it. Danny DeVito was one of the producers. He was against it.
Right.
And but Jim was getting me on the line to try to convince him that there was no way he could get hurt. And so I'm telling him, I said, well, I've given a pile driver to 1,000 people, and I've never really hurt anybody yet. So I'm pretty confident I can do it, without him getting hurt. But anyway, one thing led to another. They wouldn't allow it. So we're getting ready to film the scene out in Hollywood, and they had a stunt double that looked as much like Jim Carrey as Jim Carrey did. It was amazing.
Yeah.
This guy's all dressed up just like Jim Carrey, and so they had when they're filming, they took the Olympic Auditorium out there, and they tried to make it look like the Mid-South Coliseum. And a funny story, and I guess the writers were from Hollywood, and they bought into so much of the shtick that Andy had said. We get out there and get ready to film this scene, and it's supposed to be the Mid-South Coliseum. And Steve, I look in the audience, and they've got probably 1,000 extras in this audience, and about half of them are wearing straw hats and overalls.
That's from the South, right?
Cowboy hats, right?
Yeah.
And so I went over to the director, and I said, man, let me tell you something. I said, Memphis is not like some podunk hillbilly town. I said, I don't think I've ever seen anybody wear a straw hat. I've been wrestling there for 20 years. I said, I've never seen anybody wear a straw hat to the match. And I said, and not all of these cowboy hats either. I said, it's not like a hillbilly town. I said, Memphis is a blues town. It's not that, So I swear this costuming guy gets out a megaphone. He goes up and says, everybody that's wearing a cowboy hat, lose the cowboy hat and straw hats, put them under your seats. So about 100 people take off these cowboy hats and put them up under their seats, right? So we get ready to start filming the fight scene. And so Jim does all the lead up to the stuff of the antagonistic things, and then finally he gets me in the headlock, and he's standing with me in the headlock, and the director goes, cut. And so then the stunt double comes in, and he gets me, and Jim gets out of the ring. The stunt double comes in, puts me in the headlock. I pick this guy up, and he says, action. I pick him up, boom, drop him on his head, and the director yells, cut. He rolls out of the ring. Jim rolls back in, and he lays down where that guy was, his action. And so then I reach over. They get a tight shot of Jim's face. I reach over. I pick him up. I stick his head between my legs for the pile driver, and the director yells, cut. He gets out of the ring. The stunt double gets in, puts his head between my legs. Action. I pick him up. Boom. Give him the pile driver. Same thing. Cut. In rolls Jim, and we go through this for about 10 takes, right? And finally, the people in the audience are actually yelling at Carrey, "What's the matter? You afraid to get a pile driver?" some of these extras are actually heckling him, right? And so we're getting ready, and this was amazing. It was like Director Milos Forman gets on the microphone and says, "Ladies and gentlemen, I know you're getting antsy. I promise you this is the last take. We're going to do this one more time. We're just readjusting some lights. This is going to be the last take, and then we'll call it a wrap. Everybody will be able to go home." So everybody applauds, right? So I'm standing there in my corner, and all of a sudden here comes Bob Zamuda, who was Andy's best friend and writer and everything, in real life Andy. And he comes walking over to me in the ring, and he's just talked to Jim, who's in the other corner. And Bob Zamuda kind of under his breath says, "Hey Jerry, on this take, when you pick him up for the pile driver and the director yells cut, he said, just go ahead and give him the pile driver, and we'll have it on film, and there'll be nothing they can do about it." And he said, "Jim wants you to give him the pile driver." And so then he turns around and walks back across the ring, right? So now I'm thinking, holy crap. Now this is all on me. I'm going to give this guy a pile driver, and I know what he's going to do. He's going to lay there like he's hurt. He's going to have him call in an ambulance and all this crap, just like Andy did.
Yep.
And I said, and I'm going to look like the big a-hole, right?
Yeah.
So the director, Milos Forman, is walking by. He said, "Everybody in the places, get ready." And I leaned down, and I said, "Milos." And he said, "Yes, Jerry." And I said, "Andy just sent Bob Zamuda over here." Or not Andy. I said, "Jim just sent Bob Zamuda over." And he said, when you yell cut, he wants me to go ahead and give him the pile driver. And he just wants to take the pile driver. And he said, "Oh, Jetty, I'm so glad you told me. Thank you very much." He gets the megaphone. He says, "Ladies and gentlemen, that's a wrap. We're through for the day. Thank you very much." Oh, my gosh. I looked over, and Jim Carrey was freaking furious. His eyes got as big as saucers, and he's looking at me, and he storms out to the middle of the ring, and he grabs the ring, and he grabs the microphone that the ring announcer was using, and he starts feeding the house, and he said, "Let me tell you people something. I wanted to take a pile driver, but the insurance people, and they were afraid, and they wouldn't let me do it. I'm not afraid." And all of a sudden, they cut the microphone off. Suddenly, he couldn't be heard, and he was really even more furious now, right? So he starts screaming, "I have worked on Broadway, and I do not need a microphone to be heard. I am not afraid to take the pile driver. Lawler's just afraid to give it to me." And he comes right over. I mean, this was like a total shoot. He comes right over and gets right in my face, and veins are bulging out in the side of his neck. I'm looking at him like he's nuts. And he just looks at me, and he spits right in my face.
Wow.
It's a big hogger right in my face. And I went, "What the?" And I just lost it. And suddenly I think he came to his senses, realized what he had done, and he runs. He turns around, he starts running across the ring. I've just lost it then, and I run across, and I catch him right before he can slide out of the ring by his neck. I had him in like a reverse face lock, right? A reverse chin lock. And he's tried to slide out underneath the bottom rope. Now, he had about a 300-pound, this big black guy that was his security guard. He sees what's going on, so he grabs Carrey by the ankles, and he's trying to pull him out of the ring, and I got him by his neck, and I'm pulling him back into the ring, and all of a sudden I'm thinking, oh, wait a minute, what am I going to do? I got to beat up Jim Carrey here in front of the world, right? So I let him go, and the guy pulls him down onto the floor, and sure enough, wouldn't you know, they call an ambulance. He goes to the hospital. I go back to my trailer and everything, and he goes to the hospital, and I didn't hear any more until later on that night at like 11 o'clock news. I swear there's a freaking big hurricane. I don't know what the hurricane was. There's this hurricane going on in Florida. People are getting their homes blown away and everything. It's a big, huge news. And the lead story on the 11 o'clock news was Jim Carrey injured by a wrestler on the set of Man on the Moon, news at 11, film at 11. And that was like the huge, big story of all of Hollywood. And then the next day, I get word that I'm fired from the movie. And that I go home and Jim Carrey wants me replaced and all the scenes reshot with somebody else. And so I'm just thinking, geez, what am I going to do now? Anyway, I go home, and about a week goes by, and I didn't hear from anybody except all this news that I'm off the movie, and they're going to replace me and everything. And then about a week later, I get a call from Milos Forman and the director, and he says, Jerry, can you be in New York on this date? We're going to film the Letterman scenes with David Letterman. And I said, I thought I'm fired. I thought he wanted me over there. He's calmed down. Everything is okay. We got it all smoothed over. We love you, Jetty. You're terrific.
Of course I do.
so the funny thing was then of course, the scenes we were shooting next were the Letterman where I got to slap him. And man, oh man, did I paste that son of a bitch. I hit Jim Carrey so freaking hard, much harder than I hit Andy Kaufman. And he got up and he was holding the side of his head. He said, oh my God, you really punked me out on that one. And he said, Milos, I hope you got that on one take because I can't do that again.
So he knew he'd been a jackass, huh?
Oh yeah, he knew it. And he gave me this nice North Face jacket. He gave me a bunch of gifts and stuff like that. And you know what? I swear to God, just a few weeks ago, I haven't heard from Jim Carrey in years. A few weeks ago, I get a call from his secretary and says, Jim has something he wants to give you. Want to get your mailing address. I think, what? And so I give him my mailing address. I give her my mailing address, and I said, what is it? She said, I can't tell you. It's going to be a surprise.
Oh, God. We don't like surprises.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, a couple of days later, I get this box, a not very big box in the mail, and I open it up. There's this letter, a handwritten note from Jim Carrey, and it was weird in the sense that apparently somebody gave Jim Carrey the costume that I wore, the wrestling costume that I wore in the movie Man on the Moon, and apparently he thought it was from me. I don't know. I never saw that. I wanted the costume. I never saw it after the making of the movie.
Right.
But in this letter it says, Dear Jerry, the gift of the costume that you wore in Man on the Moon is possibly one of the greatest gifts I've ever received. Working with you in that movie was both an odyssey and was shining moment in something, I don't know, like really putting me over, right? And he said, I know that you have dabbled in music and cut your own albums. He said, I just wanted to give you something from my record album collection, and I hope you enjoy it. And he said, next time you're in L.A., he said, I have a suite at the Staples Center. Give me a call. I'd love to have you as my guest. And so anyway, that's the letter. And then in the box were about 8 record albums, pristine condition, mint condition record albums, all by wrestlers. All like there was, the Hulk Hogan WWE album,
right.
Album by Sweet Daddy Siki, album by Antonio Rocco, all of these different wrestlers that over the years, I mean, some of them went back to the 60s and everything, all of these records that had been cut by wrestlers that somehow he had in his record collection, and he sent them all to me for some reason or other. But anyway, that was his gift that he sent.
So do you play them all the time?
No, I've never played any.
Hey, before we wrap this one up, and you got to come back on the show, because I knew when we started talking there was going to take multiple shows. But before we wrap up the conversation about Andy Kaufman and yourself, at one point during the feud, you wrestled a guy on behalf of, Jim Carrey, and he was the Colossus of Death.
Right.
Who was the Colossus of Death? I must know.
The Colossus of Death was, oh my gosh, what is his name? He came in with the Garvins. He was the big guy. He came in with Jimmy Garvin as his partner. Oh, Steve, I'm the world's worst on trying to remember.
Just part of the way he walked across the ring with his hands up. I was thinking Plan 9 from outer space. It was a tremendous. And then you'd go ahead and lock up with him because he had his arms out. Kind of like walking like he was sleepwalking, kind of.
Right, like Frankenstein.
Yeah,
walked like Frankenstein.
I just had to know who the Colossus of Death.
Oh my gosh! If the next time you have me back, I'll have his name. I just can't recall it right now. But and you would know him Oh, gosh.
One of the lines also, I think, when Kaufman kind of started feuding with Jimmy Hart there towards the end, they had their little tiff, and I guess Kaufman slapped Jimmy Hart, and Hart was running off in the mouth that he had been slapped in front of 355,000 people. 355,000 people. I guess at the time that was the population of Memphis.
Exactly. That was
tremendous.
That was our viewing audience. That was our Saturday morning ratings, and we were, in Memphis. Of course, you were proud. Because the population of Memphis literally was about 700,000 people, and we had on Saturday mornings 355,000 of those people were watching Saturday morning wrestling. So that was a huge. That was a big news story in Memphis. So for him, that's what he was referring to at the time, and of course, to everybody that was watching, that did seem like a huge amount of people for Memphis TV. But you're right, the little tiff that when we worked Andy in, and it all became a ruse as they were actually working together to get back at me in the end. But when we had the little interview set there with Andy and Jimmy Hart fighting. If you watch that, it's the best non-fight scene you'll ever see. Both these guys are like two girls slapping at each other. Neither one of them made contact with anything, and it was the funniest and the greatest pull-apart that there's ever been in wrestling, if you ask me.
Well, I'm talking to Jerry the King Lawler. You can follow him on Twitter, at Jerry Lawler. At Jerry Lawler on Twitter. His website is www.KingJerryLawler.com. Jerry, thanks for coming on the show. I hope you had a good time because I've got 6 pages of notes I didn't even get to yet. So please say you'll come back.
I know. I get a little long-winded sometimes, especially when I'm talking about myself. So
it ain't long-winded.
I'll be more than glad to come back anytime.
People listen to this show because they're driving to work. They're working their ass off. This show is for the working man, and when guys like you tell stories, it puts a smile on their face. I got a smile on my face. I've been talking to Jerry the King Lawler for hours and hours. I'm going to take a break. Coming back, wrapping up the show. We've been talking to the King. All right, everybody. Tonight, Fox is kicking off a new Tuesday lineup loaded with laughs, and it all starts with the premiere of Dads, the new Fox comedy from the creators of Family Guy and Ted. Seth Green and Giovanni Ribisi are the best of friends with the worst of dads, and when their dads decide to move in, there's no way out. It's the premiere of the new comedy, Dads. Then, you have the right to get excited about Andy Samberg and the show critics call the best new sitcom of the fall. It's Fox's new comedy, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, the new office comedy about the law without the order. Andy Samberg and Andre Braugher star in Brooklyn Nine-Nine, premiering tonight after the premiere of Dads, only on Fox. You're talking to Jerry the King Lawler. That might have been the longest "oh, hell yeah" I've ever done. Mo, what'd you think about the creation, evolution of Kamala? Hold on, let me break it down for you. Here, Kamala, the Ugandan giant. Kamala. You got to look his old videos up. Wasn't that badass?
Man, that is so badass. This guy just comes up to him. He's like, yeah, man, I want to wrestle. He's what? Where's Kamal from? Memphis or where they?
No, he's from Mississippi. I think he's been wrestling some small shots. I think he's already in the business at a very beginner level and has that conversation with Jerry. And Jerry looks at the guy and sees money.
Yeah.
Go sit in the dressing room. I'll be there in a minute. They put their heads together. And, dude, I was there. I was watching, world-class championship wrestling in the USWA when they created Kamala, and they started showing those vignettes, and I was hooked, man. I said, man, this dude's bad. And he had the big drum on him, the big belly, and he kind of hopped around a little bit, and he patted his stomach. And when he give you that big tomahawk chop, brother, you sold that sumbitch, and you went down. He was a big man, and he worked like a big man, and he drew money.
It's crazy. You guys were filmmakers as well as wrestlers and costume artists. You did all it's like you're just grown men just having a good time playing like you're a kid. It's awesome.
Well, that's one of the things that they did great in the USWA back in the day was make all these little videos, vignettes, things, because they were way ahead of their time, and they were putting rock and roll rock and roll music and videos together for all the talent. Or in the Kamala case, just walking out on Jerry Jarrett's 100-acre plot of land in Nashville, Tennessee, Hendersonville, Tennessee, and making it seem like Africa. And on a dime, because, man, they weren't spending any money because as it went down the road on the show when they were talking about the Andy Kaufman feud, Andy Kaufman wanted an ambulance to be brought to the ring.
Yeah.
That was going to cost an extra $300. And so Jerry's telling him to get his ass out of the ring. Finally says, I'll pay for the ambulance. So they're filming these videos on a dime, so they're ahead of their time in my estimation. But let's talk about Andy Kaufman. What an interesting story that was.
Wow. What an interesting life that was. Everything that Andy Kaufman was really smart. He was great at cutting promos. You never, I guess his life as a comedian really helped. But the way Jerry went along with it, it sounded like it was perfect that Vince McMahon Sr. didn't go for it.
Right.
Because Jerry was the perfect cat to go along with this.
You're 100% right on that. It's I don't know if I'm sure Vince Sr. would have made, something out of it. Mm-hmm. But the way it organically, I always hate to use that word, but the way it organically happened down there in Mid-South in USWA, and they took their time with it, and he'd come and go, and they dragged it out forever. And it was absolutely insane. I watched the whole thing, in the last few days before we talked to Jerry, and relived it. And he had a ton of heat, and people hated his guts, and he loved it. And that was the thing, because like Jerry said, I don't think he really looked at himself as being a comedian, but a performance artist.
Yeah.
And he loved just pushing people's buttons and getting a response. Whether it was love or hate, he liked getting that response. And he loved being a heel. He loved being hated.
Yeah, that's why he would have made the perfect wrestler. I think a heel does that to a T.
Put 100 pounds on him. He needed 100 pounds. He needed his gym. But, man, he was wired for it. Yeah. There's a lot of guys go out there these days. They're scared to be hated. They're scared for the heat. And he loved it.
And, Jerry, look at Jerry, right? A lot of guys who, when you go on these shows, right, and the stress of that and the expectation, you can't do this. The fact that Jerry goes on Letterman, a huge show, all of America is going to watch, and he just puts a smack on Andy Kaufman that no one knew about. The balls that takes. That could end your career today if it's taken the wrong way.
Absolutely. And,
or it can make your career,
It made that. Well, I mean, he already had a great career, but it kept sustained the angle and obviously all the mainstream publicity.
Yeah.
Because, back then, all the, it was regional territories. And all of a sudden, for that to be the main story, all of the United States and the world, coming out of Tennessee, Memphis, badass.
That'll put you on the map. Yeah, it's crazy. Worldwide.
It was interesting to hear him talk about filming his movie Man on the Moon.
Wow.
And with Jim Carrey, because Jim Carrey, I guess, got so absorbed into being Andy Kaufman. Mm-hmm. Well,
we've talked about this, actors.
Yeah. Are you one of those guys?
When I first started acting, I did a method acting school. And, part of your exercises is going out into the world as characters. Mm-hmm. And you start to drink that Jesus juice and start to go a little bit nutty. But no, not anymore. I think those people take it way too seriously.
Well, I tell you what, Jim Carrey took it pretty serious. He got his ass slapped when I went back and did those David Letterman scenes. Because a smart guy anyway, but especially a smart guy who's a veteran in the business is going to get his payback in. And Jerry saw the perfect opportunity to plant a damn slap on Carrey's damn kisser, and Carrey knew that he had just gotten his receipt.
I would have loved to have been there in person live. I think that's why Jim probably wanted him replaced, because he knew down the line he was going to have to get that receipt. I
don't think he was looking that far down the line. I think a guy got so caught up in the moment, he went into asshole mode and couldn't pull back. And, hey, speaking of asshole mode, right now, as we speak, I don't know when the show's going to air. But right now they're talking about us flying a couple of bombs over to Syria.
Yeah.
Because of that red line that's been drawn in the sand about the chemical weapons used over there in Syria.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Look, I'm from Lebanon, so the Syria situation is very close to home. It's tough, man. I don't like seeing us get involved in a lot of overseas wars, especially if they're not our fight. But it seems to be what we do, and we need to change that, hopefully.
Yeah, but to me, I think, hey, Obama drew a red line on the sand, and I think he just needs to step back. Right now, I think he's in put up or shut up mode, and I think he needs to take a step back and let a cooler head prevail. I don't think dropping a couple of scuds over there, cruise missiles, whatever you want to call them, is going to do anybody a bit of good. It's just going to provoke and antagonize a really, really bad situation. So it remains to be seen what happens. Hey, man, let's trim that out because we don't know when this is going to drop.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. I just went there because I was thinking about it off the fly.
They may have dropped it by the
Yeah.
Who knows?
So anyway, we were at, where were we?
We're at Jim Carrey.
Yeah. So anyway, but Jim Carrey got his ass a receipt delivered by Jerry the King Lawler, and I know that had to feel good. Okay, one more time.
Yeah.
Anyway, so Jim Carrey finally gets his receipt delivered, hand delivered, no pun intended, the slap by Jerry the King Lawler.
First class from the King, right?
First class, and they one take. He wasn't going to do it again. Bring in the stunt double.
Oh, yeah, I can't imagine him taking more than that. Most actors, it just depends on the actor. I'm surprised Carrey wanted to get pile drived. That's crazy. I could see why he wanted that, because a lot of actors like to do these things organically in the moment that are going to cause an honest reaction, and that may have been why, but still, though, you can't pile drive a guy that's never been pile drived or prepared for it before.
Well, when I watched some of that stuff with Lawler and Kaufman in the ring, Kaufman was almost a piece of spaghetti and uncoordinated and discombobulated. It was hard for really Jerry to do too much to him safely because he was so uncoordinated. Mm-hmm. So I don't think it would have been a great recipe for success had Carrey taken the pile driver, and maybe would have got hurt just because he's a fragile human being. But no disrespect to him. Great actor. Seems to be in great shape, but a pile driver's a pile driver, even when executed by someone like Jerry the King Lawler.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, with that being said, let's wrap this son of a bitch up.
Why not?
Steve Austin, BS on Twitter. What you got?
Mo Darwish on Twitter. That's MODARWICHE.
Heard she don't have a Twitter account, but you can catch her in Marina Del Rey driving around with a black Suburban with me. Cruising the streets of Los Angeles, fighting crime, killing bad guys. I'm not really killing bad guys, but I would if I had a badge. That's all I got to say, folks. This is Steve Austin. I'll catch your ass down the road. Really.
Thank you for joining us for another classic episode of The Steve Austin Show. Please leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts and tell your friends. For more Steve Austin Show, go to PodcastOne.com. That's PodcastOne.com.
Podcast One presents. This is a collect call from Sing Sing.
My name is John J. Lennon. I'm locked up for selling drugs and committing murder. I'm also a contributor for Esquire magazine and the Marshall Project. So I'm a writer and I'm a prisoner. Imagine trying to stay focused and talk about issues of substance with geeks slamming, prisoners screaming, and PAs blaring in the background.
Get new episodes every Wednesday on Spotify, Podcast One, and Apple Podcasts.